Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us over your lunch hour for another one of our WESC webinars. My name is Ali Ramsey. I am WESC's Communications Coordinator, and we are so happy to have you here today with us. Our topic today is a really exciting one. Today it is how to navigate and reconcile cultural value differences for business success. And it's presented by Angeline Chia of Sites on Success Consulting. So if you have any questions as we go through this presentation, please feel free to put them below in the Q&A box. And if you want to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, please do that in that chat box as well. And as always, this webinar is being recorded, so you will have access to view it on demand. You will be getting a link for this tomorrow, and it will be online by the end of the day today. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Angeline now to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Ali. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year to each and every one of you. And welcome to the presentation on bridging cultural differences for business success. My name is Angeline Chia, and I am an intercultural development consultant and leadership coach, and the founder and principal of Sites on Success Consulting. I'm delighted to be here to facilitate this workshop. Thank you to WESC for the opportunity to present this workshop. I'm a WESC member, and I'm grateful for their support and for allowing me to engage with their members and with members of the public through this learning event. I'm also grateful to live on Treaty 4 territory and the Métis homeland. As an immigrant from Singapore and a settler, I'm proud to acknowledge that the land I am speaking from is the traditional lands of the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Michif Nation. I also acknowledge the history and legacy of Canada's colonial system for Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And as a responsible settler, I pledge to work towards the goal of reconciliation with Indigenous peoples as outlined in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Thank you to everyone for showing up at a busy time at the beginning of a new year. And during the COVID pandemic, when health and safety concerns are still paramount on people's minds and agendas. I am truly humbled that you are taking time to focus on self-development in intercultural competence. And I hope you will find value and support from this learning experience. If you would like to, go ahead, as Ali has mentioned, introduce yourself in the chat box, and please mention as well the territory or location from which you are joining this workshop. You should also have received a worksheet yesterday from WESC. You will be filling up this worksheet throughout the workshop and can keep it as a record of your time investment. If you haven't already done so, perhaps you may want to print it off, but that's up to you. If you don't have the worksheet, let Ali know and she can email it to you. So settle down, get comfortable, and focus on these questions. You have a couple of minutes to answer them, during which I will keep silent. You can keep your responses to yourself. There is no need to share them. Now let me share a bit of background about myself and how I got here. As mentioned earlier, I am a leadership coach and consultant, and I specialize in intercultural competence development. I discovered intercultural competence while I was working on a Master of Education degree in Human Resources Development back in 2008, and I was writing a paper then for a class in consulting. I had been an ESL, English as a Second Language educator for many years. And in my paper, I recommended intercultural competence development for professionals in my field. At the time, I was working as a program coordinator and instructor, and I had no idea that I would one day offer training in this area, let alone become a solo entrepreneur. Such is the adventure of life. After completing my degree, I went on to work in employment training and employer workplace liaison, where I had the opportunity to take some training in intercultural competence, including a professional assessment. Later, I was offered some opportunities to provide similar training, and I realized that some key pieces were missing. For example, no professional assessment was provided, training was not targeted to individual levels of development, and there was little or no focus on developing cultural self-awareness. Meanwhile, I had acquired a certificate in leadership coaching and had also become a professional assessor of intercultural competence. So I decided to branch out and start my own consulting practice. Since then, I've had the privilege of partnering with individuals and management teams in their intercultural development. I'm grateful and happy to say that this January marks the 6th anniversary of Sights on Success Consulting. In designing this workshop, I have been guided by several sources that I have been learning from through the course of my professional development in diversity, inclusion, and equity, leadership coaching, and intercultural competence. I have, since 2008, been deepening my understanding of these sources, then synthesizing and integrating them into the training I offer. For example, I came across Dalia Deardorff's process and pyramid models of intercultural competence during my HRD degree, and soon after learned about Gert Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Then I was introduced to Mitchell Hammer's model of intercultural competence during the training as a professional assessor. Except for Trompinaz and Hamden Turner's book, I should point out that there are no sources here on business processes or how to run a business successfully. This is a learner-centered workshop. The expectation and intention is that as leaders and business owners, you will reflect on your respective business context and experience. Then you will integrate your reflections with the material presented to gain a deeper understanding about yourself and your business or company or organization. I also developed some underlying principles for designing this workshop, based on my understanding of the theoretical sources and my consulting experience to date. These principles include, for example, that many individuals may not be aware of the impact and significance of their performance with cultural differences. They may not be aware either that intercultural development or learning how to bridge cultural differences is an effective strategy for improving performance and outcomes. Together, the theoretical sources and the principles led to the creation of 2 learning objectives for this workshop. Namely, learn about culture general differences and how you manage them within your business or organizational context. Learn some effective strategies for bridging cultural differences for business success. As you will experience during this workshop, these objectives have been broken down into 5 strategies and 5 activities for navigating and reconciling cultural differences. For example, The first strategy is to learn about your own cultural identity to deepen your cultural self-understanding. The last strategy is to apply knowledge about cultural general differences to improve your performance and outcomes. I have created a process with these strategies, and so they are interconnected. Here are some ground rules before you start the activities. This workshop is intended to be partly interactive. As we go through the activities and you fill in the worksheet, please post questions about the activities in the chat box only if you need clarification. I will invite you to share your insights for specific activities. Otherwise, I prefer that you post questions about the content in the Q&A box. I will do my best to respond to your question at the end of the session. You should also know that this workshop is heavy on self-reflection. I will give you a few minutes to respond to each activity. You may find the pace a bit intense, but just do your best with the time given and focus on your own learning. There will be a few minutes of silence as I will take a break from speaking while you work on each activity. Altogether, there will be about 20 minutes or so of quiet time. So let's begin with the first strategy I've designed for bridging cultural differences, which is to become aware of your own cultural identity. Your task is to create a cultural profile. The rationale is that learning to understand yourself will help you to understand others. I'd like you to think about one or two of your core personal values, beliefs, and practices, and the cultural factors and influences that may have shaped your identity. For easy reference, here's a list of cultural factors and identity influences. You can select 2 or 3 of these cultural factors for the values that you identify and include them in your cultural profile. By the way, if you're wondering why there's an image of an iceberg in the slide, it's because the iceberg image is a very well-known model and metaphor for culture. In intercultural competence development, the focus is on the subjective aspects of culture. The subjective aspects of culture are found below the waterline of the iceberg. They include values, beliefs, and cultural influences that are beneath the surface and invisible to the naked eye. Here's a basic example of a cultural profile that you can revisit and build on as you develop intercultural competence. In the interest of time, you can use short phrases or point form. You have 4 minutes to complete this activity, and you can begin now. When you finish your cultural profile, you can post your responses in the chat box if you like. Thank you. When you finish your cultural profile, you can post your responses in the chat box. Thank you. Okay, that was my timer. Sorry about that. So I don't see any responses in the chat box, so we'll move on. The next strategy is about reflecting on someone else's cultural identity. This person should be someone you interact with frequently, perhaps every day in your company or organization, and you may know this person quite well. If you cannot think of a person you work with, reflect on a family member or friend. Choose someone you have had misunderstandings or conflicts with. And the reason for this is you'll be referring to the same person in the other activities. So choose someone you have a significant relationship with. Briefly describe what you know about their core values, beliefs, and relevant practices or behavior. Again, consider the cultural factors that may have influenced how this other person's identity was shaped and developed. Select 2 or 3 of the cultural factors from this list. For example, perhaps they talk a lot about their educational background or their family background, or they participate in events or practice customs and rituals that showcase their ethnicity or spirituality or gender identity or sexual orientation. So you have 4 minutes for this activity and you can start now. You do not need to share your responses in the chat box for this cultural profile. Strategy 3 is a combination of strategy 1 and 2. It's about comparing your cultural identity with the other person's and identifying both the similarities and differences. You should compare the values, beliefs, practices, and cultural factors you identified for yourself and for the other person. Take about 3 minutes for this activity. At this point, you can post in the chat box one difference you discovered between yourself and the other person. So if you're finished, please go ahead and do so. I'll give you a minute or two to post your responses in the chat box. Identify a difference between yourself and the other person whose cultural identity you described. And I see a couple of responses. Religion, generation, religious spiritual beliefs or no spiritual beliefs, not able to celebrate the same holidays. Cultural integration with family, unlike myself. Religious beliefs, there seems to be a common theme going here. Thank you very much for sharing. Constant doing or need to be connected to work. Excellent. These are great responses. Thank you, everyone. The next strategy calls on you to recognize and identify the cultural differences involved in a misunderstanding or conflict. Your task is to reflect on a misunderstanding or conflict you experienced with the same person whose cultural identity you described earlier. What might have been the cause of the misunderstanding or conflict? For example, lack of punctuality or not meeting deadlines, trouble working with other team members, difficulty following company policies, etc. What cultural differences might have been involved? How did you deal with the issue? What was the outcome? How did the outcome impact your business or operations? Please note that you don't have to describe the misunderstanding in detail. Just think about what happened, keep your answers short, use point form or phrases if possible. Try to finish this activity in 4 minutes, beginning now. Okay, you can relax for a bit and just listen for a few minutes. It is now timely to introduce some important culture general differences or cultural dimensions to you. Culture general refers to frameworks that provide a perspective for comparing and contrasting cultures and values. These frameworks do not refer to any particular culture, but rather provide general categories that facilitate our exploration of values, beliefs, and behaviors of any culture we encounter or experience. There are many culture general dimensions that have been researched and developed. The ones I've chosen for this workshop are part of a framework that was developed by two management consultants, Fons Trompanaz and Charles Hampden Turner. They completed 10 years of research based on surveys submitted by managers from countries around the world. They published their findings in a book called Riding the Waves of Culture, which is now in its 4th edition. I'll briefly describe 4 categories of cultural dimensions. As I'm doing so, you can make a note of which dimension more accurately describes you or that you prefer. Individualism and communitarianism. This dimension can be summarized by asking, do we work as a team or as individuals? Do people desire recognition for their individual achievements, or do they want to be part of a group? Individualistic cultures believe that your outcomes in life are the result of your choices. In these cultures, decision makers make decisions, and they don't need to consult to do so. Thus, decision makers can make decisions at speed. It is your responsibility to look after your happiness and fulfillment. Cultures based on communitarianism believe your quality of life is better when we help each other. Thus, these cultures organize themselves around groups. There is a strong sense of loyalty within the group. As a result of this group tendency, decision-making is slower as everyone gives input. Job turnover will be lower due to high group loyalty. The group gets rewarded for high performance, not the individual. Please also note that although each of these dimensions seem to be presented as a binary, you can spread each pair of dimensions out on a spectrum. For example, I consider myself more of a communitarian than an individualist on that spectrum. Therefore, I would put an X closer to the communitarian end of the spectrum than the individualist end of the spectrum. Neutral and emotional. This dimension can be summarized by asking, do we show our emotions? In a neutral culture, people tend not to share their emotions. Emotions are, of course, felt by the individual, but they are kept in check and controlled. Observing these people, you would consider them cool and rational. In an affective culture, people tend to share their emotions, even in the workplace. In an affective culture, it is considered normal that people share their emotions. Remember to make a note of your preference for either of these dimensions. Sequential time and synchronous time. This dimension can be summarized by asking, do things get done one at a time, or do many things get done at once? In a sequential time culture, time is very important. People like projects to be completed in stages. Time is money, and so it is important that each stage is finished on time. It's rude to be late for meetings in these cultures. In a synchronous time culture, people see the past, present, and future as interwoven. Because of this, people do several things at once, as time is interchangeable. This results in plans and deadlines being flexible. It also explains why punctuality is less important. Think about which of these dimensions you have a preference for and make a note of it. Universalism and particularism. This dimension can be summarized by asking, or this category can be summarized by asking, what matters more, rules or relationships? Cultures based on universalism try to treat all cases the same, even if they involve friends or loved ones. The focus is more on the rules than the relationship. Cultures based on particularism will find relationships more important than rules. You can bend the rules for family members, close friends, or important people. Each case has to be examined in light of its special merits. So once again, choose the cultural dimension that best describes you. The last strategy is about applying knowledge about culture general differences to a misunderstanding or conflict. In this activity, you will reflect again on the misunderstanding or conflict you experienced with the employee, business partner, or customer in your previous example. You may update your answer in activity 4 with one or more of the 4 culture general differences you have just been introduced to. And you have 4 minutes to do this. So go ahead and work on this activity now. If you have completed strategy, the activity for strategy 4, think about what culture general differences you identified between yourself and the other person, and you may post that in the chat box. And also, if you would like to share what you realized about the misunderstanding or conflict, go ahead and do so. Share your insights based on this cultural difference. Thank you. Okay, I see some responses coming in. From Tiffany, the difference in how we seem to view time was a light bulb moment. I was perceiving their style as chaotic and disorganized, but perhaps it's simply that I view time and projects more sequentially. Excellent, Tiffany, thank you. Anyone else would like to share whether the difference was individualism or communitarianism, neutral or emotional, or universal or particularism? I'll give you a few seconds or rather a minute to write your responses in the chat box, and then we'll move on. Okay, I see someone has written individualism. Okay, was the difference? Universalism and particularism. I like to follow my heart rather than rules, from Alina. Excellent. How about neutral or emotional? Did anyone identify that category of culture general differences? Milton says, I like to be in control and get things done right, so I must be an individualist, but there are times I can do and adjust to communitarianism. Yes, that's right, Milton. There are times we shift along the spectrum or continuum from one cultural dimension to another. So no one has experienced misunderstanding or conflict based on neutral or emotional. That's okay. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you so much for your responses. So, okay, let's see, am I at, yeah. So the last strategy is about applying your knowledge about culture general differences to a misunderstanding or conflict, and you've updated your answer sheets. So let's move on. I think this is the last activity. So how effective do you think you are at present in bridging these cultural differences, individualism and collectivism, neutral and emotional, sequential time and synchronous time, universalism and particularism? indicate your effectiveness on a scale of 1 to 10. Well then, congratulations. You've reached the last activity for the workshop. And thank you so much for your participation in all those various activities. Just to let you know, I've created a resource document about the next workshop, and WESC has kindly offered to email the information out to you. There are several ways you can get in touch with me if you'd like to continue this conversation, whatever is most convenient to you. So I'm happy to take your questions live now. So you can post some questions in the Q&A box if you like. And we have a few minutes before we have to conclude this webinar.
If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box there. I see somebody was raising their hand. If you just want to type out your question in the Q&A box or in the chat box, that would be great. Looks like we don't have any questions right now, but Angeline's information is up on the screen there. So her email's there, her phone, and her website. So if you think of any questions after the fact, I'm sure Angeline would be happy to answer them after this webinar, if you think of anything after the fact. And thank you so much, Angeline, for this presentation. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it. I went through the worksheet myself while we were doing this. So thank you again. Just a reminder that this webinar will be on demand, so you will be able to view it by the end of the day today, and you will get an email with a link tomorrow. And just so everybody knows, our next webinar is our Business Growth Luncheon. It's on understanding digital advertising, and that's on January 26th. So if you haven't registered already, you can do so at wesc.ca/events. And thank you, Angeline, again for this presentation. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you to everyone for your participation. It's been a pleasure being your intercultural development guide, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.